Concepting in Photoshop. Now I want to talk to you about how I got to this final concept image based off of that simple 3ds Max model file that I had. And it's going to be a combination of different techniques using Mark's original concept as well as reference images I found and even some books I purchased online that I'll go over. The other thing to let you know is that this is a final concept, but you'll see during the video process I had an older concept that I thought was final, but it wasn't, and I changed, so it's just kind of a natural evolution of my design process. So let's start. Hello everyone. Before we get started, the usual promotional material here. If you'd like to buy the course, it is available on Gumroad, and you can just click the yellow Gumroad button that pops up on the screen. And it's also available on Steam if you'd like to purchase it from there. And if you need to be able to find the links to that within the YouTube chapter, just come in here where the actual video is, click on Show More, and you can see the different links to Gumroad and Steam here. That's about it. Let's get going. So if we go back to Max, if you remember, this is where we left things off. We had the Lowpoly model of our shield and axe and sword. And what I did to get started is I just took everything, I added Turbo Smooth on top of it so that it had a nice smooth looking screen. And then I did a print screen of this, and then I copied it into Photoshop. And then I started using that as a base in here, underlying that I could start painting over top of to create all the different design. So this will kind of jump around a little bit, may not be super organized, but I think by the end of it you'll have a good idea of how you can work pretty quickly and come up with some cool ideas without having to just hand draw something out that can take a really long time. And that being said, this is my final image that I'm going to take before I start moving on to the next stages of modeling. I'm sure that I'll come back, I'll probably do some more paint overs, things like this, but for me right now this feels pretty good for moving forward. So a couple of things I want to show you is I tried some different elements. I got Thor's hammer hanging from the horns on top of the helmet that I've now put into our scene, and I feel like the composition on this is starting to flow pretty nicely. And let's go ahead and just show you some of the various images that we had during this process. I'm going to zoom through a couple things here. So up here, this is when I was exploring some different helmet iterations. And you can see originally I really wanted to show Thor's hammer and have it built into like the nose guard, and it just never really felt right to me. I was trying some different things. There was a couple different designs that were kind of cool, and then also too you can see I was trying different types of helmets. This is more of a kind of plain type helmet that I found a reference image of online, and then this is one that I really liked, a very ornate helmet that was online that I found, and I kept trying different kind of nose pieces for this to see if it was going to work nicely. And for a while I was going with this. I was like, okay, I'm going to start building my concept around this, and I thought this felt pretty nice, but it just never felt super perfect to me. So once I went back to just having a straight up nose guard, and I decided to then hang Thor's hammer off of the horns as if it was a necklace pendant, it felt a lot better to me, like you see here. And actually that's kind of more accurate to how you would have seen Thor's hammer used in the Viking culture. Most of the time they had like a pendant around their neck and they could grab onto it or whatever if they had to say a prayer before battle. And this just started feeling a lot better to me, being set up naturally. And so anyways, you can see that I was going through several iterations here, and even down here at the bottom you can start to see I'm doing several different axe inlay iterations, trying different patterns, trying to find something that's going to work, and in the end I come up with something like this. So let's take a little closer look at some of our Photoshop files. The first Photoshop file I want to show you is the final concept, but with the reference that I was using for specific parts highlighted in different folders. So let's go ahead and go up here. You can see I've got a lot of nicely organized folders, and then I have one called Shield. So for the shield, what I did is I found a shot from the television show Vikings that I liked, and I literally just copied this out and then put it in here. In the end, I think these bolts are going to be a little too large and throw off the scale a bit, so I'll probably scale them down and make them a little bit tinier. The next one was the axe. If we zoom in here, you can see that I have quite a bit of inlay detail as well as different wraps that I added through Photoshop. So in here, You can see that we have a design here, a really nice inlay design that goes into the center, and this is a design I got from a book that I'll show you guys in a minute. And on the inside, this was just a nice image that was on my axe reference compilation image that I've been referencing that I found on the internet, and I wanted to do something that felt kind of like this as an inlay on our axe. So that's kind of the vibe that I took there. And then you can see that I've used several elements straight from Mark's concept, and I placed them here like on the rings or the bolts. And then again from the Viking TV show, here's one of the axes that they use, one of the replicas, and I just cut and paste the rafts from here onto the end of the axe and thought it felt pretty good, as well as taking these little X wraps here and stuck them up top. Let's take a look at the necklace. The necklace you would think would just be something simple, and normally elements like this get overlooked and people will just put something like a simple cord. For me, I always, every time I'm thinking about something, I think of the function behind it, and a lot of the necklaces back then you have to have them tied off somehow. So this was a type of knot that was commonly used back then and still used today, and I just think little touches like that help make it feel more realistic. So I just looked online for various kind of necklaces that were leather and how they tied those off, and this is probably what I'll do in 3D. And then we have Thor's hammer. This is an actual replica of a ancient design of Thor's hammer. And then let's go ahead and take a look at the helmet. This one, the helmet I spent the most time on because I don't have a 3D model for this yet. So before I started building a 3D model, I really wanted to explore how I wanted to create this. Whereas the axe and the sword and the shield, I pretty much had a good idea of what I wanted to create before. So again, looking at Mark's concept, the banner up here and the horns, I still wanted to keep those. So I literally just cut and paste those and then did some modifications on them to fit the composition that I liked a little bit better. And then the helmet itself, the one that I ended up on was this one, which was from my original helmet reference. I can't remember where this was from, but it was one of the really highly designed helmets that I used as a base, and I modified this a bit. And then for some of the design elements that are in here, close to the center here, again, I reference pattern books. And you can see in here, I just literally cut and paste that into the center. And then in here, it's kind of hard to tell because I've modified this quite a bit. I found an area of this little section right here I liked, and I cut that out and then modified it to work with this eyepiece and set it in here. So that's kind of what I mean by photo bash, and you can cut and use pieces the way that you want to and make them look good. That's what I did down here as well. Speaking of those pattern books, let me go ahead and show you those real quick. If you look here, these are the two books that I bought that I've been using. And one is called Viking Designs by a guy named A.J. Smith, and Celtic and Old Norse Designs by Courtney Davis. And basically what these artists do is they'll go to different museums and places like that and look at the actual boats and armor and various relics, and then they'll draw down the patterns in black and white, and they provide these that you can use royalty free as long as you're not just reprinting them into another book. So normally what I'll do is I'll use something like this for inspiration. Even in my final piece, I don't know if I'll use them one-to-one, but it's really cool to be able to access these and reference them, and they're really affordable on Amazon. Literally both of these are only like $7 each. So I recommend you just pick one up because there's a ton of great stuff in them. And if you have a scanner, you can just scan them in. And then otherwise, they also have versions that you can buy with CDs that are like $10 more. So that was something that I used a lot. And if you hide these, what I did is once I got the books, I found the designs that I thought were the most interesting in terms of what I could use for my project or just inspired me. And then I made a big Photoshop file out of these. So you can see down here I have different layers like nose guards, designs. Designs are pretty much anything that I found that was kind of a vertical repeating pattern. Axes, this is basically designs that, even though they're not necessarily all for axes, like this one is used on a bedpost, I think. but for me, I was trying to visualize like what would be a cool pattern to use inside an axe, and I think I actually used this one inside our design for the axe. But yeah, stuff like this is invaluable reference from other artists, and it's nice to highlight what these artists are doing for us. And yeah, this series of books, like Dover, this company, the name of the company that produced these books is called Dover, and they have tons of these, anything you can think of. So if you ever need good patterns, check those out. Really, really useful. So I just showed you the final image and the reference I used to get to that, but let's go ahead and show you some of the variations throughout the process that occurred as I was working on this piece. So now what we're looking at is a final Photoshop file of the asset as I started working through it. And in here on the right, again, you can see I'm very organized with all the different layers of things that I have. And if we go through here and we start turning these off, hammer pendant, helmet, axe, sword hilt, shield, eventually just get down to that original max file that we started with. And that's what I started with when I came in here. I just had this image, and then I had Mark's concept that we were looking at, and all my reference images, and eventually that's how I got to what you see here. So the first thing I did was obviously go through and I cut out Mark's banner and was able to place it here the way I wanted to. I changed some coloration here just to make it fit a little better with the scene and the tone. And I'm going to show you some tricks and techniques a little bit later for different things I'll do for overlays to change colors, things like that. But for now, I just want to go through these different layers and show you some of the different things I tried. So let's take a look at the hammer and pendants layer. I'm just going to zoom in here. So this is where I decided that I was going to have a necklace that was going to hang in here. And before I started doing that, as you remember, this was a reference image that I had previously when I was trying to find the tie-offs. I was trying quite a few different things because like little changes in something can really affect the composition. So if we look at this as a whole, check how this deep image, I think in the end, you know, I might need to use something like this if this feels too central. Like if the viewer's eye gets stuck right here because suddenly there's no, you know, so much empty space here, I might switch to a deep necklace. So this is an iteration that I might use. The other thing that I was trying out previously was different hammer designs. So this was another hammer design. It was actually from an ancient replica. And then of course the one that I'm feeling more like. And the reason I like this one a little bit better was purely a compositional choice. Because of the angle of this going more like a triangle, it keeps your eyes flowing like the X that you have here, whereas I felt like this, although it was a cool thing, it leads the viewer's eye this way. So the whole composition here, even though it wasn't intentional, was circular in angles. So anywhere I can do that, I try and keep the eye flowing around certain focal points. Here was another one that I thought was kind of cool, but I think the face is just so overpowering that the viewer is immediately just going to want to go to that. Anytime you see an image that has something that has human featuristics, that's not even a word, human features, people tend to look at those things. So eyeballs on something, your eye's going to want to go there right away. So even though I thought this was really cool and this is an actual ancient relic, I wanted to go with something that was a little bit more subtle like this. So again, angles and the simplicity of the design. So next, let's take a look at the helmet. This one, since we didn't have any 3D base to it, went through lots of iterations. And I showed you some of the stuff earlier that it was flipping through, but there's a lot more to it. So I split this up into a brows layer, a horns layer, nose guards layer, and even a helmet base layer. So the helmet base layer, there's not a whole lot to it. I'm just going to keep that there. That's basically the underlaying of the helmet that I decided to use. You remember earlier you saw some different ones, different styles that were more simple. I actually tried 4 or 5 different ones, but this is the one that I like the best. And on the nose guards, I actually tried quite a few different things. Let's go ahead and hide this. This was a design that I tried that I didn't really like. This was another one I was trying. I found out in the end I kind of like the squared off point at the bottom, even though I thought that a point would be aggressive. This was kind of interesting, and it's an actual nose guard, and that is from that one of those pattern books, but it's just, it felt too gentle to me, the rounded base on it. This was similar to what we chose at the end, and basically the only difference there was the pattern. And who knows, at the very end when I'm done with this, I may not use either of these patterns. I might make my own, which feels a little bit more aggressive, but we'll see. This original size layer, I think that was just where I had copied these original patterns and kept them in there in case I needed to have them for detail later. But yeah, that's kind of the base of how the nose guards are working. The horns, the only thing that's useful to highlight in here is sometimes I go through to pop out some things like the bold here highlights. Horn illustration, what I did is I took Mark's illustration. I've actually made this a multiply layer. If you put it on normal, it's just pure black and white, the illustration. But what I like to do sometimes is I'll take like a base color in here that's representative of something like this, so it doesn't just look like an illustration like this. And I'll go through, and when I have something like that, I'll control click this so that I can select this layer. Again, that's just like control click a layer, and then it'll click whatever is in here. And then I'll go to that bottom layer, and then I'll just paste whatever type of color I want. I think I did some type of copies of this helmet. And whenever you go back up top here, switch that to like a multiply, then, you know, it kind of ties into the piece and it feels a little bit less illustrative. So, I don't know, I just thought that was kind of cool to do. And as I'm doing this now, I see that I've hidden one of our nose guards, so we'll turn that back on. The other thing I did in here, and I played around a lot with, was the brows. And the reason why is I wanted something that felt a little more aggressive, hence the pointing down. So let's expand that and look at it. I tried a couple different things here. This is one that I tried that was interesting, a pattern. I liked it, but it was a little too simple. My original again. This was one that I tried again from that pattern book. And it's pretty cool, but it just needed a bit more to it. This was one that was nice. I like how simple it is and elegant. It's pretty cool. I still like this one a lot. And in the end, though, this is kind of what I decided to go for. And if you remember earlier from that photo bashing, this was part of the design from one of those books that I now combined with some of the original elements from the helmet as it was. So yeah, that does it for the helmet. And that took me a good while, a couple hours to figure out what I wanted in there. So the next was the axe. It was funny, I thought this would be really quick for me, and I thought it'd be done right away. And in fact, the first thing that I did on the axe was trying to figure out what I wanted to do for this inlay in here. And I have an image in here that shows you some of the different iterations I did. I was just trying some things like as simple as a shape like this, which originally I almost went for this because I thought it flowed really well with the shield. But then it was a little bit too simple, and I was talking to my wife. I was like, hey, which ones do you like? And she liked A and D. And for me, the point here felt a little bit unrealistic in terms of what they may have manufactured back then, so I didn't want to go super sharp. And this felt a little bit too thick, so I think in the end I had settled on something that kind of blended down here. It felt like it'd be able to be more easily manufactured. And I looked at a lot of the reference that I had from photos, and saw a lot of really interesting little designs like these dots that you see all over the place. So that's how I ended up coming up with that. The other thing that I'm doing in here, you can see I've got some things, bands and bolts. This is just for these pieces down here. Remember earlier I was showing you I actually took this straight from Mark's illustrations and copied them over my metal pieces, so I'll probably end up putting these bolts in here. And this, I tried a couple different designs up here, and I'm still not 100% satisfied with this. I may end up playing with that in 3D some more. But I tried a couple different designs in here. This is like a Celtic knot, but this just didn't feel right to me. That felt like a weaving. So I think I just decided I was going to do something like this for now, and then maybe I'll add some bolts to it. The other thing I was playing around with quite a bit was the handle wraps, and you remember I took those from the Vikings TV show replica and just copy pasted that in there and played with it a bit, and then also had some of these wraps that you see here on the top left. That worked out pretty well. And then this thing, it says axe head rotated. I think I did all these different inlays. Each of these things are some of those inlays you saw earlier. I was playing with the different designs. But I had part of this where it was rotated, and then one where these are straight up just because it was easier for me to do the design. And I'll show you what I was doing there later, because I was using some techniques with the pin tool that's over here in order to get some of these really accurate lines. So sword hilt, the Trondheim sword I felt pretty comfortable with, other than I just didn't like, I think the Trondheim sword reference that I had was just a solid piece of leather. I liked having a hand wrap in here, so I just found a nice image on the internet and then paste that in there. And I think that's probably what I'll end up doing. I'll just probably sculpt that stuff in. I won't even hand model any of that. So next was the shield. This is the one I was mentioning that I used from the Vikings TV show reference. And like I was mentioning, I think these bolts are going to throw off the scale a little bit of the whole scene, so I'll probably scale them down, and I might even add smaller bolts in between. Okay, so what you're seeing now is a final concept that I came up with. Basically, between that last take where I faded out, where we were talking about the large bolts on the shield, to this, I thought I was done with the concept at that point and ready to move on, and then I just wasn't feeling totally comfortable with it. So what you see now is about another 4 hours, 5 hours of work playing around with some different designs. So let's go over that really quick, and then I'll get into some of the actual techniques that I use to create these. So this is kind of the final thing I came up with. If you remember just a second ago, this is what we were looking at. And we had the larger bolts, and then now on the shield I've got smaller bolts, things like that that'll help with the scale. I've also added bolts to the different Odin elements in the shield boss, and I've also added some textural elements into the shield, because with it just being plain like this, I wasn't really getting an idea of what the textual information might start adding and how it would affect the composition later. So doing that quickly, even though it'll probably change, helps me visualize how things will flow in the future. The other thing that I did too was the Odin pendant. I ended up moving that down, and that was based off some feedback from one of my friends at work, Tony Pertinjevec. He was mentioning that by having this right in the center, it was messing up my composition, and he's right. We need to move it down because your eye's just going to the center here. The other thing he mentioned is don't worry about having this string across the center, even though a necklace might have that, because that again is breaking the round composition. So that's what I did. Lowered this and then removed those lines. And I don't know about you guys, but I think it worked better. Now the eye continues to flow around the composition, and also now, since I have a lot of information up here, this little pendant helps, in my opinion, anchor the composition down, and helps also flow with these lines the way the pendant's shaped up. So I thought that worked out pretty nicely and helps the composition overall in the end. The other thing I did too was the helmet. I decided to add some more elements that were similar to the whole Viking theme, and instead of having the old face guard that was like this, I decided to incorporate Odin's raven into this piece, and I've even went so far as to give him just a singular eye, because Odin only had one eye. His ravens had two eyes, but I was trying that and it just didn't look that good. The other thing that I did as well was I tried to simplify the helmet design up here and keep it a little bit more easy to read, because I was playing around with some different things up here, or maybe keeping this, and I felt it was getting too busy. So I wanted your eyes to focus here and then have another area where you can kind of relax a bit. And one thing I want to show you guys as well, as I was playing around with coming up the idea for Odin's raven, is I looked online for different raven reference and found a lot of really cool designs for some people on DeviantArt in different locations, and I just compiled the images together so that I could look at what I thought were some of the cooler elements. And you can see in my piece I've actually kind of used a lot of the design you see here, and then I kind of like the tail that was happening here at the bottom of this piece, and you know, I've just adjusted those a bit to fit for the shapes that I like, and made my own drawings and whatnot to keep the tribal elements flowing. And I just thought that would be cool, you know, have Odin's element incorporated into the armor somewhere. It's just a really interesting shape. It makes me wonder if that actually occurred in any of the armor back then. That would be pretty cool to have on your armor if you're a warrior. I could imagine that would strike fear into your enemies. The other thing I want to show you really quickly on this Ravens thing is I also was thinking about the shield bolts and nails when I was working on things, and I found these nice nail replicas of the actual nails I would have used when they're building boats or shields. You'll notice that it has a flat head, and then it also has these kind of cross lines. So I'll make sure to do that with my bolts whenever I start making them on my shields. I won't just keep them round like that. And yeah, I think that's about it. So now I'm ready to show you some of the techniques I use in Photoshop, and I also want to just mention the importance of doing this. As I was doing this, I was doing some traditional 2D illustrations, but also this photo bashing, and locking down this concept for me, especially with all the really important design and compositional elements, is going to save me so much time in 3D. So if I can just pretty much create what we see here and then make it look even cooler, I think we have all the strong elements of the composition that won't go away. So I highly recommend that whenever you can, come lock down a good concept and then move on with it. So yeah, that's it for this part of the photo bashing part. And let's jump into the techniques.